Hi, my name is Natalia Robles and this is my article critic presentation. The name of the article I will be discussing is How Immigration Affects Workers, Two Ground Models, and a Right One. This article was written by Ethan Lewis and published on Cato Journal in fall 2017. In order to make a critique on the article, I would like for all of you to know a little bit about the article itself. So the first part of my presentation, I will be summarizing the article and then I will provide my critique. The general idea of the article. The author tries to clear the myth of immigrants having a bad effect on jobs and wages. His arguments are based on three immigration models. The main purpose of this paper is to clear up the misunderstanding about immigration and jobs generated by the press and public debates. In order to do so, the author reviewed the topic by explaining two economics immigration models that are incorrect, and lastly, one that is correct. He does this by supporting his arguments with studies made by other economists and his own. There are three major hypotheses, and the first one is that there is a fixed number of jobs in America and that immigrants take away the jobs of native born workers. The second hypothesis is about more workers mean lower salaries, and lastly, the third one is that immigration affects work when it affects the variety of skills. In conclusion, the author proves that the effect of immigration on jobs is the opposite of the common misconception. Getting rid of immigrants will most likely destroy jobs and raise native unemployment. Also, immigrants have no impact on wages because when you add more workers, the capital simply adjusts and there is no harm on adding workers. And lastly, that the skills of the immigrants are different than the skills of native born, and as a consequence of this, salaries for native born workers tend to go up. Now I'm going to go more in depth on each one of the arguments. The first argument is about fixed number of jobs. Nowadays, people believe that there is an equal amount of jobs for every native-born worker. So this means that if an immigrant gets a job, then one native-born worker will lose the opportunity to get that job, which is completely false. The number of jobs in the United States is not fixed at all. Multiple research studies came to the conclusion that not only do immigrants not take jobs away from the native-born workers, instead they create jobs for them. This is because immigrants also generate consumer demand. This means that immigrants need food, they need clothing, they need housing, and etc. These necessities generate demand for new workers. Also, immigrants raise product diversity through supply and demand channels. For example, immigration comes to the opening of local restaurants that usually generate job opportunities. Then, actually, getting rid of immigrants will most likely destroy jobs and raise native born unemployment. The second argument is about more workers mean lower wages. This theory has been explained by using the model of supply and demand, commenting that when you add workers due to immigration, the wage fall to equilibrate the economy. There is an error when predicting that more workers lead to lower wages. This error is the assumption that the capital stock is fixed, when actually the demand for workers is horizontal because the capital freely adjusts. Then there is no wage impact from the increase in the number of workers. The third argument is that immigration affects workers when it affects the skill mix. On this model, the author says that immigration affects just when it affects the number of different kinds of workers. This means that if they have skills or not. The author comes up with a mathematical model that calculates the ratio of skilled or non-skilled immigrants and native-born workers. He uses data from the last years and then comes up that due to the different skills that immigrants and Native American have, the only effects that immigrants bring to the workers is that actually most of the wages of Americans end up going up. Now that you have an idea of the article, I'm going to continue to give my critique of it. Well, first, let's remember the title of the article, How Immigration Affects Workers, Two Ground Models, and Write One. The author organized his piece by first introducing the topic and why it is important, and then goes on to prove his points on three arguments. Each argument is a model where two of them are wrong and one of them is right. Because of this, for me, the title of the article matches perfectly the content. It gave an introduction about what the article is going to be about, and it also mentions how it's going to develop this topic. For the abstract and introduction, usually a journal article is supposed to provide an abstract where the author will summarize his topic and his findings. This author fails on providing an abstract. However, he has an introduction which gives the perfect amount of information to leave the reader wanting to read more, and he also gives some sources that builds the trust between the reader and the author. On each of his arguments, the author goes ahead and uses a grid tool to support his claims. He usually states the misinterpretations of other authors in the topic, and then he provides clear evidence on why they are incorrect. When he does this, he gives credibility to the reasoning of his arguments, and then it's possible to know that the author has clear knowledge of the topic. The author does not limit himself to cite others to prove his claims, but he also proves his claims by using mathematical models and statistics that definitely makes his arguments really strong. For example, for his first model, he uses statistics from the Bureau of Labor Statistics to show number of jobs in the United States from 1960 to 2014. For his second argument, he also uses the supply and demand model with figures that support his claim. And lastly, for the last argument, he develops a mathematical model where he is able to prove how the skills of workers have an impact on wages. I am not an economist major, not an expert on the topic or the terminology and theories, but the author makes sure along his arguments to explain on detail every single concept, which makes the article interesting and easy to follow for all type of readers. However, I will have provided more explanation on his second argument when he uses the supply and demand model and the reasoning behind its graphs. He simplifies the topic too much that it becomes confusing when it comes to for him to explain his concepts and the numbers. In general, the author is objective along his article. He provides the necessary information to support all his claims that end up coming together very clear for the reader to understand. He makes his paper interesting from beginning to end, which makes people who may not be interested on the topic read the entire paper. He provides trustable sources which build a feeling of trust between the reader and the material he is discussing. Overall, I consider this a really good journal article for everybody to read and understand more about the topic of immigration and its effects on jobs and wages.